All right, we are live on YouTube. And then let's see. All right. All right, we are live on Instagram. Welcome, welcome, my friends. Hope you're having a great Thursday. I had to think what day it was. Hope you're having a great Thursday. I'm going to talk about a topic here today that is a popular one, is one that I think always garners a lot of interest. And I think it's one of those topics that just, especially in this day and age that we're living in with a lot of the diets and keto and carnivore and everything that kind of is more so limiting carbohydrates, I think it becomes important to have some repetition with this area because I think it brings a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety um, when it really doesn't have to be. So, really the topic of today, if you didn't see the post today, is really at its core, why does cutting carbs make your blood sugar worse in the end, right? Why do we have followers that reach out to us that after cutting out all carbs, their blood sugar or their A1C actually went up or their crashes got worse, right? Why does that happen? And there's a few different reasons that that happens that we can get into, but essentially it all comes back to something known as metabolic flexibility, which is kind of a mouthful, right? And really, what does that mean? Really, what that means at its basic level is your body can process all foods without experiencing blood sugar spikes, blood sugar crashes, right? If you have the ability to do that, then you have what's known as metabolic flexibility. If you do not have the ability to do that, let's just say carbs really spike you up. Let's just say that maybe your meals aren't very lasting. Maybe they last you for like an hour or 2 hours, but they you can't really get to the 3 or 4 or 5. You can't go long without eating. You always have to pack something. If you're of that background where you're tending to notice or you're noticing some blood sugar symptoms or your numbers are jumping up or crashing down, that is a sign that your body is just not metabolically flexible, meaning it can't process foods, and then when it doesn't have food, it can't switch over to processing other things to kind of keep your energy and your energy up and your blood sugar stable, right? So how do we get there? Well, it comes down to actually understanding, why we do what we do, especially when it comes to, cutting out carbs. Why is that maybe not quite the best move? Because I think, whenever we're talking about these things, I think it's very easy to say, but when we have an understanding of why we want to maybe do things a little bit differently, then it gives us more um, ability to pay attention to those sorts of things because we all have a lot of things every day that could potentially take our attention, right? But the most important thing is understanding why. We don't have to have a PhD in nutrition or health or anything like that. But having a basic understanding is really helpful so that we're not maybe misled to some degree by some of these different approaches. Not that the approaches in themselves are bad, but in a sense, what they can potentially set us up for long term, right? So having that understanding, and then two, this is what really builds what we call blood sugar resilience, or what we're talking about today, metabolic flexibility, where we can process all sorts of foods, carbs, fat, protein, desserts. It really doesn't matter, and still have our blood sugar fall within the spot that we want it, right? Or feel good after eating, right? So there are a few different places where cutting out carbs may not be the best move long term. And I want to preface this by saying that some of the clients that we meet with, they need to kind of back down on carbs because they're not quite meeting their body where it's at, right? And that's especially for those individuals that have really high blood sugar, right? Where maybe it's in the 300s or 400s or 200s, right? Where they really need to just build some insulin sensitivity again. And, we can't just keep pushing carbs down our throat. To do that, we have to really improve our processing of that, right? Which we'll get to in just a second. But at the same time, it doesn't make carbs not important, especially in the long term, because do so much to improve and support our health, from hormonal balance to thyroid health to energy to being able to feel good when we're working out, right? Providing so many vitamins and minerals, especially things like potassium, right? They help to lower stress in the body so we're less exposed to stress hormones. So they do a lot of different functions outside of just their ability to potentially raise or crash our blood sugar, right? But it's less about the carbs and it's more about how can your body process those carbs better, because honestly there are metabolically flexible people out there, right? I grew up an athlete. I went to college and played soccer, and I can tell you every single one of those people that was on my team, they were not eating a low carb diet. They were absolutely eating high carbs and did just fine. In fact, it improved their performance on the soccer field, right? So how do we do this, or why is cutting carbs maybe not the right approach? Well, I think for me, it starts with what we see mentally for people, because it's almost as clear as day, and it can really create some resistance when it comes to, of course, wanting to have more flexibility with the foods that they eat, but also kind of having a mental block around that. And the reason I say that, because when we are cutting out carbs, we also send a signal to ourselves that, oh, carbs are bad in a sense. They should be avoided because I have blood sugar issues. And when I eat those carbs, they spike my blood sugar, for example. And so when we make the decision to then cut them out, it automatically makes them, you can say, either more attractive or more fearful, right? We're going to be thinking about them in terms of, okay, how is our blood sugar going to react? How is our blood sugar going to react? How is this going to affect my post meal blood sugar? And especially when you're a little bit more ambitious and a little bit more conscious of your health, like a lot of people are on this channel, what that in turn does is every time that you go to a party or a gathering, or find something that does have carbs in it, or even if it's not, what you're going to be constantly questioning is, how is this meal, how is this food going to be impacting my blood sugar, right? And that in itself, regardless of what that meal looks like, is going to increase anxiety and stress and worry, which all work to increase the very blood sugar challenges that you're trying to improve upon, right? And we see this every single time, especially with clients with like the high blood sugar, but especially low as well. We found a client that we were working with very recently, who had like high morning blood sugar and was spiking post meal, and she was kind of doing this. And sometimes it's not like you're trying to sabotage yourself. You're trying to make sure you feel good after a meal, like anybody else would want to feel. But in turn, oops, I think we're cool. I think our phone just went low power mode. Um, when we do this, ultimately, it creates more stress on our body and it prevents us from processing the meal. Versus if we were a little bit more calm around it, in terms of almost recognizing the nourishing aspects of that, the stabilizing aspects of that, the energizing aspects, right? If we were looking at more of the positive, um, associations with those foods, even if it was the same meal, we would react a heck of a lot better. And we see that with clients across the board when they're able to implement that in a way that really works for them. Even if it's the same meal, their blood sugar will be a heck of a lot better than would it be if they're in this constant state of stress and worry, right? And then I will say, when we're cutting out these foods and then we notice a reaction to them, like our blood sugar spikes up, for example, basically it confirms the belief in us that carbs are bad and we shouldn't be having them, right? Versus when we can kind of calm that and tap into more of the positive aspects of that, it can confirm us the opposite, that, hey, our mindset in terms of how we're thinking about this food really has an impact on how we tolerate it, right? So it can kind of, in a sense, backfire a little bit and move into, hey, this really isn't about the food. It's about my ability to process these, and I'm making it more difficult on myself to do that when I'm constantly thinking about how my blood sugar will react, right? So that is really important. And speaking on that stress line, carbs are really important. They're important for lowering stress on the body. When we have long-term low carb diets, oh, my connection was lost. I think my connection was lost. Jeez, I don't know why. Okay, I think we're back up. But as I was saying, um, when we have, you know, long-term low carb, we're really raising stress hormones. Stress hormones cause more of the blood sugar issues that we're trying to prevent, right? So again, it's not about getting rid of carbs. It's about finding our sweet spot, what our body tolerates, and then working on improving our processing or our tolerating of carbs. And I think about this too in a few different ways. I think about it in terms of tolerating because we always have to think about, okay, if I'm not going to eat carbs, what is the opportunity cost, right? It's an economic term. But it's almost like, okay, if I don't do this, what is the other thing that I do, right? Because is what I'm doing now better or is what I'm doing worse, right? So when we look at cutting out carbs, something has to fill the void there, right? And it ends up being a lot of fat for many people. And again, fat isn't bad, just like carbs aren't bad. But in excess, what ends up, happening is we become less good at processing carbohydrates. It lowers our tolerance of those, right? And then when we're really low carb and really high fat, then, we eat maybe a couple of strawberries, for example, or blueberries or sweet potato, and our blood sugar really spikes up, right? And so it's more about, again, how can I improve my processing and find the balance that I need rather than going to super big extremes, right? The same thing is true of like when you avoid carbs for a very long time, it's very similar to, I think about growing up, we worked on a lot of like rental houses, and my job was to mow the lawn, and I had like a push mower where I'd go up and down the lawn with a push mower. And every time during the spring, there was, we need to kind of restart the push mowers, and they were harder to start because they haven't been started in a while. You had to like push that. I don't know if you guys, have used a push mower before, but they have like that air button where you push it and pushes, I believe, air into the system, and you push it again, and you pull the lawnmower to kind of get it started, and it doesn't start. And you do that, you repeat that process for several different times until eventually it finally starts, right? And it's kind of similar to our bodies in that way too. Of like, if we're cutting out carbs, we have to, give our body some time to practice it again, right? We're not going to just come out of it out of gate of low carb or keto and being able to process carbs because it was missing for so long, and we have to restart that pathway in a sense. And so again, we become less good at processing carbs when they've been missing for so long, right? So that's huge. Now, the other piece of this too is, you know, we find a lot of clients, and at the end of the day, it's the marketing that we receive, the messaging that we receive, either from doctors or social media, that if we have a blood sugar issue, it's automatically a food issue, and that can certainly be the case. And I'm not denying that food is important to stabilizing blood sugar. It absolutely is. And typically, it's not a conversation in our world of eating healthy because most people are. It's about eating healthy in a way that works for you, and so that's the nuance. But also, too, we forget that lifestyle makes such a big difference to our blood sugar balance in terms of how we're able to tolerate carbs, right? Because sleep makes a big difference. Circadian rhythm, which are the very hormones that determine our ability to balance blood sugar and sleep through the night and have good energy and lose weight, like all of those things have an impact. Our muscle mass, right? Our stress levels, in terms of less about the external stressors and more about how do we perceive it, or how can we tolerate that better, right? All of those pieces, at the end of the day, we find are very much missing from a lot of clients experience. And when they can start working on those, that is truly the thing that helps them to reverse their blood sugar challenge so that they can become more metabolically flexible and be able to eat carbs and not have a blood sugar issue and not have a worry about where their blood sugar is, right? So I think about lifestyle pieces as being as providing the ability to reverse these blood sugar issues that we have, and food is the means to manage those, right? And if we combine both together, we have the best of both worlds. But many times, this is the missing thing. We put food on a pedestal, and it is important, right? But it's not so important that it comes at the expense of not looking at other things and providing more of a holistic perspective. And this is what helps our clients to reverse type 2 diabetes, to have more in range blood sugars with type 1, less crashing, less spikes, helps our clients to reverse reactive hypoglycemia and hypoglycemia, right? So finding more stability, and that's without cutting out carbs. That's without relying on medications to be able to do that because we're working on what is truly causing it, right? We're not saying carbs are causing it because people can eat carbs and do just fine. We're looking at it, okay, it's not that your body is broken, it just needs a little bit more support with the right environment to be able to do so and looking at the right pieces. And it's not about adding, more and more and more and more things to do because many people think that like, oh, I'm focusing on nutrition. Now I have to add in lifestyle pieces. It's more about, okay, based on what we know about you, what would be the most leveraged move that we can make? Meaning, when we pull this lever, how big of a result are we going to get? Because I'd much rather clients make a change and see a huge result rather than having to add in 10 changes to get the same result, right? So it's not about doing more. In fact, that often adds more stress to you. It's about doing the right things, which inevitably becomes less, but they're big things and they're big things that actually move the needle. So I hope that helps. This is such a huge topic and something that we go over all the time with our clients and looking at the individual pieces that are preventing them from being able to tolerate carbs. And so if you are wanting to do that as well, wanting to stabilize your blood sugar while eating carbs without relying on medications, please reach out. We'd love to help. All right. Cool, guys. Well, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and we will talk soon on the next live. Take care, guys.